Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be with you again today, and hope your day is going really well. I'm writing a book. In fact, I'm usually writing a book of some kind. Not that they're ever published. There's not a large audience out there waiting for the next volume of thoughts from Tim Madison, and that's perfectly fine. I'm content with whatever audience the Lord gives me. This one is called The 9 Lives of a Christian. Phases that we go through in the Christian life. Not everyone goes through all 9, but some people do. And since it's unlikely that this is ever going to see print, I thought, you know what? I could use these morning talks to just give you the sense of each of these 9 chapters, and we can think about them. So at least the thoughts will be out there if someone can take advantage of these. And you know what? If it is published one of these days, uh, you can all say, hey, we saw it first here. Begins with what I refer to as the Christless life. No one comes into this world as a Christian. We're all born sinners. Romans chapter 5 says that before we come to Christ for salvation, we're enemies of God. And Ephesians chapter 2, it says before we come to Christ, we are dead in trespasses and sins. We all come from a Christless background. Now, somebody may say, I've got no problem with God. I don't know what the Bible's talking about there. Well, my friend, whether you have a problem with God or not, God has a problem with you because you're a born sinner. David described it in Psalm 51 when he wrote about his life before he was born in his mother's womb, even from the moment of conception. He describes himself as a sinner, even at that point. And the same is true for all of us. We all come from a Christless background. Now, there are people who know about Jesus. Maybe they've studied him or they've seen the movie, but they don't know him. And they're still living a Christless life. One group in that category were the brothers of Jesus. John chapter 7 tells us a story that gives us an interesting insight into the home life of Jesus. Mary and Joseph had at least 6 children after Jesus was born. He had 4 brothers, and their names are given in the Bible, and at least 2 sisters. But in this chapter, the Feast of the Tabernacles is approaching, and preparations are being made. It was one of the 3 pilgrim feasts where every Jewish male was expected to be there in Jerusalem for the feast. And his brothers were making their preparations and getting ready for a week in Jerusalem that they would spend there. But it was obvious Jesus was not making any of those preparations, and they asked him about this. In fact, that they said, if you want to be famous, you need to go where the people are. They're in Jerusalem. And Jesus gave a somewhat surprising answer, depending, I guess I should say, on which translation of the Bible you use. The King James Version gets it right. Jesus said, I'm not going up to the feast yet. Most modern translations delete that word yet, and they make Jesus a liar by saying, I'm not going up to the feast. But then, of course, obviously, later he did go to the feast. But then it explains what's going on in the background behind this. It said his brothers did not believe in him. Isn't that amazing? They lived with Jesus. They knew things about Jesus that we don't know, where we know what's written in the Bible, but they knew him day by day, and they saw him. They didn't believe in him. It's amazing, isn't it? That you could know Jesus that intimately and that well and not believe in him. Now, the Bible does say after the resurrection, Jesus told people, tell my brothers to go to Galilee and I'll meet with them there. And I think that's where at least two of them were saved. We know about James and Jude, and I'd like to think that all of his siblings were saved at that time when they saw him in the resurrection. Now, there are people who live a Christless life because they've never even heard of him. In John chapter 4, we have the story of the woman that Jesus met at the well of Samaria. And she had no idea who this man was. And as they talked, she became convinced that he was a prophet. And as she got to know him a little better that day, she believed that he was the Messiah and began to spread the word to people there in the village. But some people have never heard of Jesus in this world. It's hard to believe. And some people have a casual knowledge of Jesus, like the people of Nazareth. In Luke chapter 4, the Bible tells the story of Jesus returning to his hometown of Nazareth, and he was even invited to read the scriptures in the synagogue. But they didn't believe him. They knew him. They'd seen him grow up. They knew his family. I'm sure Jesus was popular as a carpenter. I have no doubt his corners were always square and his prices were fair. I'm sure his work got done on time. I can't imagine our Lord doing it any other way. Can you? But they didn't believe in him. In fact, they tried to push him off a cliff. They were so angry when he implied that he was the Messiah. Now, there are people who live a Christless life in spite of their knowledge of Jesus or their lack of knowledge of Jesus. But what's sad to me is that they're Christians who have come to Christ for salvation and they know the truth, but they live a life that you'd have to describe as Christless. And even churches today, I see churches place all their emphasis, on living your best life now, having a good life or a good family, or doing good works. And their focus is on making sandwiches for the homeless or digging a well in Somalia. And, all of those good things, those are good works. But somehow Christ is left out of it. Some people are truly saved, but do they leave Christ out of their life for other reasons? I've heard some describe it as deconstruction, as if this was some sort of an intellectual exercise that I've made a decision intellectually to leave Christ out of my life. That may be part of the process, but I found that so often, there are exceptions, but I found so often the problem is not an intellectual problem, but it's a moral problem. And it's our old nature that uses our intellect to try to justify the way we live. In the case of a Christian, when God sees that, he will call that person back to faith in Christ and put Christ at the very center of his life. And if not, he'll simply call him home. I've buried some of those people, my friends. So if you're in that category, and maybe you're on the line, you haven't come to Christ for salvation, do it today. If you're a believer and your relationship with Jesus is not what it was at one time, I invite you this morning to place him at the very center of your life where he belongs. Give it some thought, will you? And I look forward to being back with you again very soon. See you then.